Alright, so I think I've got pretty well everybody's attention now. So I'm going to spend just 30 seconds on who I am. My name is David. I'm from Canada. Nice. So I've been in India for about 7 years, and I've worked with businesses from Canada to Rwanda to Thailand to Hong Kong and the Middle East. I've worked with a number of organizations across India in the not-for-profit sector, the NGO space, on design work in that space. I've worked with multinationals, and most of my career was banking prior to coming here. So I worked on financial product design. But what I thought I would do today in service of your efforts around service design and understanding how you might add a few more variables to your design thinking efforts, I thought I'd talk a little bit more directly about what I do for a living, which is behavioral science. So, quick show of hands, who's heard of behavioral finance, behavioral economics, behavioral science? Cool. So, there's some of you that have heard it, I'm glad. Has anybody in the room read Thinking Fast and Slow? Excellent. Nudge? One guy, maybe two guys. Cool. So you guys are going to have a decent grounding of what I'm going to talk about. So I'm going to chat for about 12 minutes, maybe 15, depending on how much I feel like elaborating. And I'm not formal. I threw my jacket off. You can ask questions whenever you want. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to get into some of the things that behavioral science teaches us as we're designing product, whether we're designing marketing campaigns or service experiences. Here are a few basic notes. About half of the thought processes that occur in a day in our brain happen outside of the sphere of rational consciousness. We don't generally think about walking, having a sip of water, making a decision to buy a particular brand of masala, rice, or Coke in a store. Now, I've had many conversations with people from all walks of life that struggle with this basic concept. These thoughts, some people call them heuristics, occur in a piece of the brain that scientists call System 1, not a particularly useful moniker, but this part of the brain is more sort of normally called the intuitive brain. This is where our emotions sit. This is where we remember things from. And these are things that are responsible for answering simple problems. Effectively, what this part of the brain is a pattern recognition engine. Quite often, our brain is giving us the answer to things before we've actually consciously thought about it. For example, 2 times 2 is? These types of basic mental arithmetics are things that have been drilled into us from 4 years of age on. Some of the features of this part of the brain are that we can train it, but we cannot control it in real time. Most of the time, we are not even actively aware that the brain is doing these things. For example, we generally react intuitively to a beautiful person. We generally find someone off-putting almost instantaneously if they're unattractive, for example. And this causes a great deal of problem in sort of real life. But I'll confine my talking today to the business environment. A couple other interesting facts and figures about the brain. It's about 2% of the body mass of an average human being. But it takes up about 20% of the calories that we spend in a day. It is an incredibly energy-intensive organ. And like any good machine, it prefers to optimize where it can. So it behaves in something similar to a power saver mode, I like to call it. And I'll give you a couple of examples of this. If you're walking to the metro or walking to your bus in the course of the day, you're probably quite content to be thinking about maybe what you just did at home, to be thinking possibly more about what you're going to do in the day ahead. But if you're late, if you're 15 minutes late there was a power cut, geyser didn't turn on, couldn't iron your shirt, and you have to race to get there, chances are you won't be thinking about what happened. You won't be thinking about what you have to do in the day. You'll just be anxious. You'll be walking faster. You'll be racing a little bit. Something similar happens if I ask you to think about your walking. So you've all seen pageants where you have models walk down a runway. When they first teach people to do that, they trip. And they trip because you're making the second half of your brain think. You're making it actually be involved in an otherwise completely automatic process. If I have to think about walking, I'll likely trip. You can see this when you look at if any of you are aunties or uncles in there, anybody in the room an auntie or an uncle of a young child, maybe under 2 years of age, just learning to walk? If you want to be a little bit evil, say their name when they're trying to walk. They'll fall over. It's super funny. I did it to one of my nephews. So, the reality is, most of the time, our brain prefers to operate using these intuitive processes. We have a pattern recognition system that wants to learn how to do a thing repeatedly over and over and over again with as little effort as possible. And this will be really important to understand when you're designing how you onboard a customer, how you keep a customer engaged, coming back to use your product over and over again, and particularly important when you're designing service experiences with human interaction, one-to-one. So here's the trick. And I'll use, because I have a couple of extra minutes, I'll give you a live problem that I'm working on. If you're designing something new for somebody, we need to find a way to reduce the cognitive load. And I'm going to give you a plain language explanation of this. So we know that our brain prefers to operate intuitively, that it'll only engage the rational, conscious part of the mind when it has to. Think of it like a turbocharger. It needs extra power. There's physiological demonstrations of this happening. So let's try out a little simple arithmetic problem. 4 times 4 is?
16.
39 times 47 is? How can someone actually go to answer that? Let's try that again. 148 times 74. Wicked. Some of you are the answer. Here's what actually happens when you do that. The intuitive brain says, ooh, I can't answer that question. Let me engage the rational brain. Some of you would have maybe quickly said, all right, let me do that arithmetic table in my head. But there's 2 things that will actually happen if you didn't automatically have that answer, if you weren't mathematics prodigies. Some of you would have looked up. But all of you who were not mathematical prodigies were trying to think of the answer to that question. If someone was looking at you square in the eyes, you would have found your pupils dilated. It's been measured. This is one of the reasons that poker players wear sunglasses when they're playing their games. They don't want to see people actually trying to process. It's not different from how that little spinny Apple wheel comes on when the computer needs more power. Our brain doesn't want to use this power. So, I'll give you a short example of this in a consumer scenario. Amazon and Flipkart, and to a lesser extent Snapdeal, struggle to sell expensive electronics to lower middle class Indians. And I'll be more specific. They struggle to sell televisions to the guy that got a Geo smartphone less than 2 years ago, who is still learning the literacy that most of you in this room would take for granted. For him, when he chooses to buy a television, and he speaks in vernacular language and English, but predominantly in vernacular language, the mental effort that it takes for him to navigate through what is 4K, HDMI, Sony, Samsung, Chroma, is considerably higher, especially when he has to do that at 7 p.m. at night when he's just gotten home from work and he's tired, it's the only smartphone in the house, and his wife wants to play with it for a few minutes anyway. So for him, a considerably easier strategy is, I'm going down to the store, I'm going to talk to 2-3 guys. It doesn't mean that he won't look at Flipkart and Amazon. He will, but he'll look at it to compare prices. And because Amazon and Flipkart cannot design a process that prevent, or have not been able to design a process that this guy can navigate intuitively, he just abandons. And this, more often than not, is why electronic businesses, digital businesses fail. They don't understand how their customer thinks in enough detail. So I like to use this example a whole lot, because I imagine most of you in the room use Twitter. You may not know this, but prior to founding Twitter, one of the co-founders, Evan Williams, actually had a platform called Blogger. Did any of you know that? This guy did. You're on it. Here's the thing. It is not the normal course of human conversation or communication for there to be one guy like me standing in front of a room of 75 people talking for 15, 20 minutes. Of course that happens, but not with the same frequency of normal human conversation. And Evan understood this. What he realized was, listen, most of us would like to write a book someday. Many of us who have struggled with content marketing would understand that, listen, sitting down writing 500 words sucks for a lot of people. It takes a lot of effort. I'd rather not do that. The normal style or intuitive style of human conversation is this. I say a sentence to you, you say something back. The 140 original character limit that Twitter put in place was a constraint that forced us to communicate in a way that was far more natural, far more intuitive, in fact. So what he did can actually be explained nicely through this model. Now, apologies that it's come a little bit off the screen, I'll walk you through it. But for those of you in the back that have read a few behavioral science books, who's read anything by BJ Fogg? Cool. Some of you will have come across this then. This is a Stanford professor's generally accepted model of persuasive design. What he explains is for any behavior to occur, three things have to be in place. We need to have the proper motivation, and anybody that's taken a marketing class in university would know that they absolutely know how to play on hope and fear, pleasure and pain. We need to have the ability to make the decision in that moment. And this was that story I was telling you about the guy trying to buy a television from a lower middle class background who's new to smartphones. It takes about 2 years for the average first-time smartphone user to move from basic behavior, WhatsApp, Facebook, YouTube, to mature behaviors, to research, to transact, to use banking, for argument's sake. Most of the time, when we're designing digital businesses or we're trying to recreate new mechanisms to do what we otherwise did in real life, most of the time the challenge lies here. Sure, there's lines that say that pricing is 80% of the purchase decision in India, and that's not untrue. But when you're designing for a thing, of course you have to get the price correct. But if you get this wrong, you will be one of this following statistic. In 2017, there were 950 apps created in India, about 1 billion downloads, and there were fewer than 5% of those users who were still active 90 days following that download and installation. If you want to avoid being a statistic like that, if you want actual engaged users, pay very careful attention to the mental effort required to navigate through. If you make your customer think, they are more likely to abandon unless the value proposition is so incredibly strong. And if you're trying to build engaged users, people that come back repeatedly, people that you don't remarket to continue to come back, you don't want to keep throwing discounts and spending money to get your customer to come back. First of all, if you have to do that, you're going to fail anyway. Unless you're Amazon, unless you've got a massive, massive war chest of marketing to keep throwing on the customer to have them come back. If you have to incentivize your customer to come back and use your platform again, you're done. And I'll give you another real-world example of that. So some of you who have read a few books will probably come across this experiment. They ran an experiment with very young children, 3 groups. They were all 3 years old. In one group, they said, I will give you a star for every drawing you make. And they told them in advance that they were going to do that. In the second group, they did not tell them they were going to give them a star. They just gave them a star at the end. And in the third group, they got nothing. They didn't get told, and they didn't get a star. Which group do you think drew the most drawings? The second group. If you have to pay somebody to keep doing a thing that they enjoy, that's it, you're done. Now, there's some real-world examples where you have to keep paying someone. You have to give a salesperson variable compensation. If you take that away, they're done. But for the most part, if you have to pay for your customers to continue to come back, that's a problem. So your ROI, your effort, is better spent here. Understanding who your customer is and how they navigate from A to Z, that is going to get you better engagement than paying to have them come back over and over again. And if you're building, or if you guys are working for SaaS companies, if you're thinking about any kind of subscription business to launch on your own, this last point, I'm sorry, some of you may not be able to see it, but this last point might be really helpful. There's been all kinds of, how shall I say, anecdotes about how long it takes to form a new habit. Some people say it takes 3 weeks to quit smoking, or 21 days. I've heard 40 days. The science says this: depending on the frequency of the habit or the behavior, it can take between 1 and 9 months for that habit to become, for that habit to form. So if you're building products that need your user to come back over and over and over, if you have to pay them, you got a problem. And it can take much longer than you think for your customer to begin to rely on you as the source of gratification. So the model's fine. It's more of a diagnostic tool. So you use it a lot when you're reverse engineering. So if you're trying to do some root cause analysis of an existing product, it's a very helpful tool, but it's somewhat academic. So I thought I might give you 3 specific things that you can do. And then I'll get a little bit more specific after this. So the first one is to give your user feedback. Now, there's a fair number of boys in a room, not to stereotype, but I assume there's a number of boys in a room that have played World of Warcraft? None? That's interesting. City of Engineers, only 1 guy. Who has played a video game where you level up? Perfect, every one of you. Who's played Candy Crush? Awesome. Okay. Feedback is just gamification. Specifically, what happened is they took this from the sales world and they found a way to put it into games. So I'll talk about it in 2 ways. So first, who's been a salesperson? Cool, some of you. The early days of being a salesperson suck. You get told no hundreds, if not thousands of times. It is an incredibly demoralizing thing to do, especially if that first job was as a telecaller. I hang up on 4 of those a day. Now, what successful sales leaders in this world knew was if I gave you a specific kind of feedback, you would persevere. All I had to do was praise you for the effort. I'm not giving you a high five for closing a sale. That'll happen anyway. I am praising you for putting in the effort. And when they did that, they found significant, statistically measurable improvements in the number of salespeople that would move on to success at the end of 1 year and 2 years and 3 years. Now, in a product design world, how you can incorporate that specific feature is actually very similar to how games do it. You have a progress bar that shows the number of experience points you're earning, and then at the end of that level, some flourish happens. It could be, some stars explode. It could be a change of color on the screen. Whatever you want to design. That feedback, that praise for the effort, the time that user has invested in that game will make that person more loyal. It'll begin to build an emotional connect because we value things that we put time and effort into. LinkedIn does a really great job of this, by the way. Who has all-star profiles? Some of you. So when you do that, there's a blue bar at the top of the onboarder that says, hey, why don't you add some more interests? Boom. A little bit of feedback comes after you do it. Great job. That feedback is a monumental aid when you guys are designing your experiences. Now, who here has heard of the IKEA effect, the second one? Do you want to explain it, or do you want me to do it? I feel like you look pretty confident. Why don't you explain it to us?
It's when you provide experienced users a shortcut to do things.
Sorry, one more time for all of us.
So you give an easier route to people once they are used to something.
It can be that shortcut. Let's everyone give him a hand for being on the spot. So this particular expression might be a little bit weird for India. We only have one IKEA and it's brand new, but the concept is this. We value things that we put time, money into. Now it's called the IKEA effect. For those of you that have had the joy of assembling IKEA furniture, here's what I can tell you. IKEA furniture kind of sucks. It's not very good quality. It's a giant pain to put together. There's usually one piece missing, or we have one piece extra. All these jokes about it are true. But we start this stuff when we're in university. And when it's done, we kind of like the desk better because we put time and effort into it. Same thing happens in that gamification example, in that LinkedIn example. We value the thing that we put more time and effort into. For those of you that saw the Apple product release earlier this week, that Apple Card, Apple Cash works exactly the same way. What you want your user to do is tell a little bit about themselves, whatever very basic insights are required at the beginning, name, mobile number, email address. That most of us are okay to give that. But the next time they come back, and this is the part that a lot of businesses get a little bit too excited about in the early days. The key here is after they find value in what you're doing. You don't show the pop-up on the first screen as soon as they started to scroll. You show it when they've got to the bottom of the article and they've read it and they've said, oh, that was great, and they click like. Now put your pop-up. That's your value exchange. Now, it can be within that particular usage experience. It can be the next time they come back. It can be a month later. It can be a year later. Whatever it is, you want your user to invest in that product in some way, shape, or form. Do that, they will value it more. They will use it more. They will recommend it to more people. Now, the last one I threw in because I thought it was particularly relevant to service design. Who's heard of the peak end rule? So a couple of you. So I won't make anybody tell the story because I think they want me to get off the stage soon enough. But the peak end rule works like this. Humans are natural storytellers. It's actually, there's some cognitive problems with that. It's called the narrative fallacy, but I won't leave that on the table. The point is, as we process our day, as we move through a day, there are largely what clinical psychologists call two selves, the experiencing and the remembering self. The experiencing self has a very narrow range of time that it pays attention to. It's about a 3-second window that we would call the present. So when we reflect back on vacations that we took, we don't remember every moment of every day of those vacations. We remember mostly two things. We remember the most intense part. Hopefully it's a peak, but it could be a total disaster, the trough. And we remember the end. Now, that is particularly relevant in the service design world, and I'll give you a specific example of this. Who here has had the pleasure of calling their cell phone provider? All of you have done it one time. See, all of you hated it too. So I'll give you an example of something that we did in Canada. Here's what we did. So there's a telecommunications company called Rogers, equivalent to Airtel. And there were certain experiences where Mrs. Customer would have lost her phone. And having lost her phone, she would have been in a fairly foul mood. She would have been panicked, anxious. You can throw a list of emotions at it. These emotions are important to understand when you're mapping out your service design. But the fact was, she found herself having to call Rogers. So she gets on the phone and she's using a different phone, different SIM card. So the IVR doesn't pick up who she is. So she has to go through the annoying prompt of listening to this machine route her around with 5 or 6 steps. All the while she's getting more angry and more frustrated. And eventually, after yelling at the IVR, she finds herself with a human. So what the human does, in this case, using this peak end rule, says, "Ma'am, I'm so sorry you lost your phone. That sucks. Here's what I'm going to do for you." Now, she goes through her particular discussion with the client, but she leaves her with this little bit of value. She says, "Ma'am, I'm emailing you the most recently called phone numbers that you made." Why did she do that? Why would that twist the experience and leave her with a pretty good experience with Rogers? Here's why. Who here knows their best friend's phone number? Like, okay. Do you know your mom's phone number?
Yes.
Husband, wife?
Yes.
Okay. What about now the second circle of friends? Do you know their phone numbers? Do you know your boss's phone number? Oh. So here's the deal with the peak end rule. What that did was it said, okay, listen, I'm a telco, what help can I really offer? You know what I can do? Most people don't remember phone numbers anymore. I barely know mine and my wife's. So sending me that list in an email, at very least, I can start getting better. I can start to get back on track. So that peak end rule twists that experience. She came into that anxious, angry, upset, afraid, whatever you want to call it. Did she leave it better? So she's going to remember horrible trough, lost my phone, and I finished pretty great. So for those of you who use Net Promoter Score or any other kinds of CSAT programs, she's probably going to give a 9 or 10 out of that, even though that was a pretty horrid start. So let me conclude with 2 things that I imagine I'm preaching to the choir with this, because I think most of you are already design thinking UX, CX people anyway. So I'll move through with this. There are some skills that our education systems globally, to varying degrees, train out of us. And these are basic playground skills. And when I was walking around looking at what you guys were doing, I was super impressed with what I saw, because you're really doing these next 2 parts very well. Now, this vivid persona is a particular test that I love to give, especially in the early days. And forgive me, I'm not an engineer, so I take perverse pleasure in whipping engineers. It just amuses me, I don't know why. Here's the deal. When I start working with a client, whether they're with a proper Bangalore-based, purely tech company, a major multinational bank, a defense organization, or an engineer, it doesn't matter. This particular skill, when untrained, takes some time to coax out of people. So let's just move to the last piece, I'll show you what I mean. This is a thing that all of us, doesn't matter where you're from in the world, did. It's how our evolution works. We are taught to be storytellers by our peers, by our parents. We read we read our children bedtime stories, and when they go play and Superman, and they're telling stories of, excuse me, I can't tell the Frozen story as well as some of you probably can, but the Frozen story or the Cinderella story are things that we tell. And the reason that that's a particularly powerful tool today is this. When you cannot understand how your customer communicates, when you don't know their personality, are they rational, emotional, logical, analytical? When you don't know where they came from, if you cannot picture your customer. You don't know them. And this is why, back to that Amazon story, that Amazon struggles, because none of the Amazon engineers have lived the life of this guy. The people that are trying to design that experience have not had to grab the first rung of the middle class from abject poverty and grab on and say, I've made it. Most have not lived that experience. And so most of us struggle to empathize, struggle to put ourselves in the shoes of that person. It doesn't mean that we cannot do it. Of course we can. All of us told stories of rags to riches when we were little children. Most little boys can tell the Shrek story or the Frozen story. So here's the challenge on this particular topic. These are not skills that even postgraduate degrees in engineering teach. This is a playground skill. And I'll leave you with my little trick on this. What I've found, when you're working with particularly hard skill focused kind of teams, your product teams, your engineering teams in particular, if you come with 20-30% of the detail about that persona, if you show up and you say, hey, this is a 25-year-old guy from Hubli, he was poor, he went to Bangalore and got a degree, and now he's working in a great job. If you show up with a little bit of demographic information, where this person lives, what kind of house they're in, if you've got this, that's the kernel of the whole role. These guys, these ladies will remember, oh shoot, I can storytell. But if you cannot, across the dinner table, describe who your customer is in enough detail that someone who's not involved in your day-to-day life can't picture this person in the same way that I could tell you the story of Shrek and you can picture the big green guy. If you can't do it, if that person doesn't picture that person, you don't know your customer. And I'll wrap it with this. Now, this is a specific journey mapping technique that I use when it's new product design. If you're reverse engineering, if you're trying to tweak an existing product to fit a different client segment, this isn't exactly what you would do. But if you're trying to build something from scratch, here's the idea. Yes, you're going to need piles of data to do this. Yes, you're going to have to do ethnographic research. You're going to have to do some experience sampling. You're going to have to find ways of testing people's personalities. By the way, there's some great free tools out there if you're interested. But here's the deal. You must be able to explain to your peers how this customer who you're targeting, this persona group, navigates through solving a problem, attaining a goal, if you weren't there. That's your secret. Back to my story of the Amazon guy buying a television. I can tell you, this guy's name is Amit. He's a real persona group. And I can tell you that he's 28. I can tell you that he's got a 6-month-old baby. He got a Reliance Geo smartphone about 16 months ago. He has begun to surf the web, but for the most part, he's got a good job. He makes about $30,000 a month. He lives in a 300-square-foot bungalow. It's a one-room, concrete, one-floor structure. He lives on the outskirts of a city, in this case in Bangalore. He has a two-wheeler, and he has the beginnings of the trappings of the middle class. He has a fan, and he has a small fridge. But for him, this is head and shoulders better life than his parents were able to provide for him. So now his folks are living with him too. So this is a real feel-good story. So this guy, for those of you who know the city fairly well, takes a two-wheeler to work every day. He's about 5 kilometers away from his office. He goes down the Gulwala Road every day. And 2-3 times a week, he hangs out with his buddies, a couple of his cousins. He has chai at the end of the day at a chai shop in Yelanga, Newtown. And a couple of his buddies and one of his cousins has bought a television. How does he buy a television? Does Amit go on Amazon to buy it that way? No. So that's what the as-is journey map is meant to do. You need to describe your persona in that level of detail. Now, actually, let's see if I did how good a job I did on it. Can one of the boys and one of the girls tell me, what does Amit look like? Did I tell you he was from Hubli? He's from Hubli. So somebody tell me, what does Amit What kind of hairstyle does Amit have?
Curly hair.
He's got curly hair. Okay. What kind of shirt is he wearing? No, we want to do this because he is an archetype. He is a kind of customer we are designing for. We're not being disrespectful. Stereotyping is a generic term. Yes, it implies prejudice, but stereotyping is a thing we all do. So yes, he's wearing a check shirt. What kind of shoes does he have on? Is he wearing chuckles? He's wearing sandals. Some of you disagree. Maybe he's wearing closed-toed shoes, but if he's wearing closed-toed shoes, is he maybe doing this? Sorry, that might be hard to see. He's probably doing that. There's absolutely nothing wrong with this. This is who he is. Now designed for him. You need to be able to tell those little stupid details, those little silly minutiae, to properly understand who your customer is. If you've not lived his life, how do you know if you're designing something for him? How do you know if you're designing an experience that he will actually buy if you can't get to that level of detail? Don't be afraid of it. I mean, don't get me wrong. Prejudice is wrong. But knowing that this guy probably listens to his Geo smartphone without headphones at full volume on the bus with some local kind of music, okay? It's just a fact. These details will help you map out service experiences. You'll know how to talk to him. You'll know what kind of value to give him at various stages of marketing, purchase, and usage. You'll know how to design delivery strategies. This stuff will turn your businesses successful if you can get to this level of detail. So guys, I'm sure I went way over time. So I'll wrap it up now. I'm happy to take any questions anybody has though, while I try to put my shoe
Yeah, I
on.
have a question.
Yeah?
So, why do this level of detail, it's for one person. I mean, your business is not for one person. It's for like, at least like a lot of people, right? So why come up with so much detail for a user person?
How many Amits do you think there are? How many Amits would you think there are?
How many?
How many guys named Amit who were 28 from tier 2 cities that make 30,000 bucks a year that live on the outskirts of the city where they can afford it? How many of those are there in India?
I don't know, maybe I'm like, you know.
Several hundred million. Wow, I'm
I
exaggerating.
think that was a second.
There are many. You're right. You don't want to get so narrow that you find 5 or 10 clients, but you're meant to find a group of people that you can segment. And you're trying to segment beyond something so broad as 100 million. Amit, there may only be 100,000 Amits in Bangalore, but is 100,000 customers enough for you to make some money as a business? So you're right, you could get too narrow, but you still...
The point of divergence, I mean, we might divert by putting too much details in the course.
It does run a bit counter to normal lean startup thinking, doesn't it? So, can you find 2 or 3 Amits? That's the idea. See, what we want, I think most of us have a desire to be treated as an individual. I want you to remember me. If let's say I've been buying from you, and let's pretend that you work at Max. What I would like is the next time I come in, that you remember me, and that you say, hey, David, I got some slacks that you'll like. That's what most of us want. The only way that a business can practically do that is to know me. And if you want to do that well, you've got to find a level of detail on your segmentation that's narrow enough that you could explain what I looked like, how I spoke, but not so narrow that it's just an exercise in spending money and research. Does that make sense?
So, when you're creating this persona, are we being hypothetical or are we talking to these end users, POP sample end users, and then creating this persona?
Yeah, I know them. Shake a hand. I mean, listen, you can take some general trends. So things that I've said, like for example, the first 2 years of smartphone ownership, you can use that rule. So you can segment that way. You can say, listen, most likely someone who's had a smartphone for 8 months is probably only on YouTube, WhatsApp, and basic networking of that sort. But ultimately, how else are you going to know that Amit gets on a two-wheeler and goes down the Bumper Road unless you do it? It's called the leadership dipstick. There was a question over here, I think.
You called Amit the archetype persona. So how do I look for archetype personas? And how do I peg this persona that this is an archetype persona?
So let's take an example. What your business that you're working on today? So the design experiment that you're working on, what does it do?
So we are working, like we have focused on Gen Z, like Generation Z, people who are born in the 2000s,
Okay.
like who are right now between 13 to 18 years, and we are trying to improve their social well-being.
By doing what?
By creating a service. I mean, we still haven't. Yeah.
Okay. So in general, I'm going to admit to this. I generally approach it when you have the idea, and then I find the customer that would best find utility in that product. I mean, if you're going to go at it that way, if you're going to say 13 to 18 Gen Z, sorry, I would think to myself, if I'm trying to improve their social well-being, I would look for a facet. So what about their social well-being do you want to improve? Do you want to help them quit smoking, have better body image? I think it makes the most sense to begin studying your customers' behaviors once you've got a sense of what you're doing. And that's a different topic, I think, altogether. I'm sorry.
But isn't that, I mean, in my limited knowledge, isn't that vice versa? Like, what we did today and what I generally do is first research the user, find the needs, and then and only then can we, proceed towards creating a solution.
Do you have a problem statement?
Instead of the one we are working here, can I use?
Yeah, please.
So I'm currently working on a design project where I'm trying to improve the travel experience of para-athletes. So people, and I can scale it up to people who are wheelchair bound but frequent travelers. They don't have to be para-athletes. Right?
So now you have a customer, right?
So I have a customer. I have research. I have interviewed one of them. I'll interview a few more next week. So I'm getting their pain points, right? And whatever gaps there are in the service, in the experience, in the travel experience. So isn't as a designer, I should be focusing on those gaps and on the whole improve their. I mean, those are the biggest.
Agreed. No, you're right. That is the way to approach it. But I think in the interest of time, because I think let's take this offline, you and I. I think that's probably all the time we had, right? So, guys, thank you so much for giving me some time today. I'm sorry I couldn't answer your question directly, but thank you so much. What I'm seeing here looks like a great time. I hope you guys enjoy the rest of it.
Thank you.